Welcome to Missionary Roundtable with your host, Kale Horvath.
All right, welcome back to Missionary Roundtable. Thanks once again for tuning in. We're excited that you are with us. This is the podcast that's all about the Great Commission and international and foreign missions and just that whole world of taking the gospel to the ends of the earth. We're so glad you guys join us each week. This is season 2. If you're just now finding us, make sure you go back on your podcast app and find season 1, and you can find more missionary and pastor stories and interviews and testimony about the Great Commission and strategy and ways that we can reach the world. Today, I'm very excited for our interview. We have got Missionary Josh Allred, who is a missionary in Merida, Mexico. And I'm going to let him introduce himself here in a second, but I'm really excited. Josh is a guy that I had not previously had a close friendship with. I knew of him. My church supported him. I had met him in passing at a missions conference before, but I am very good friends with his brother, who goes to a church down in Georgia, and so I'm excited to have him on the show. Josh, thanks for being with us, and thanks for agreeing to do this with a guy that you don't even know.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me. Good to be with you.
Absolutely. Now, what I would like to do is be a part of the audience here and just get to know you. So I'm just going to ask you some questions. Now, I know, Josh, your wife's name is Amanda, right?
That's right.
Okay, so Josh and Amanda Allred, and you have 5 kids.
5. Their names are Gabriel, Michael, Bella, Sela, and Malachi.
That was a quiz. You passed. Good job.
Yes.
You remembered all.
Got to keep sharp on those things.
Right. And you are not old enough to have 5 kids, man. Like you are 3 years older than me and you have 5 kids. So man, there are crowns for you at the judgment seat that I know not of.
We kind of had a philosophy when we started having kids. It was the sooner we start, the sooner they'll grow up, and we'll have a little bit of time left at the end.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh no, that's
enjoy
good.
the grandparent years. So
right, my parents were the same way, actually. That's great. And you guys, like I said, are missionaries to Merida, Mexico. How long have you, as a missionary, been on the field with your family?
We have been here as, approved missionaries ourselves since 2014, September of 14. So we're going on 7 years. September will make 7 years that we've been here as a family.
Okay, awesome. And now this is where we start to get into some of the interesting backstory. Interesting, I think, anyway. But your father is a missionary in the country of Mexico as well?
That's right. Yeah. My parents have been here since 98. And so that would be going on, 23 years,
Wow.
I believe, if I'm doing my math right.
Yeah.
So around there.
Truly veterans in the missionary work. That's awesome.
Yes.
And so you would have grown up on the missionary field.
I did. I was 10 when we moved to Mexico. We moved to northern Mexico, a city called Monterrey, for 2 years. And we worked with a veteran missionary there, kind of getting our feet wet, really getting a hold of the language, kind of learning from him and developing a bit of a strategy of, how we were going to do what we were wanting to do. And then in 2000, actually it was Easter Sunday of the year 2000, we moved to Merida. And so we've been here. I was 12 when we moved to Merida. And then, I got to grow up here working alongside my parents, got to help start the ministry. And then in 2005, I went to Bible college.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got to study there.
In the States or in Mexico?
In the States.
Okay.
In the States. I went to Trinity Baptist in Jacksonville, Florida. And so I studied there for 4 years, graduated from Bible college, met my wife there. And so we got married. We served on a church in Texas for a year, and then started raising our support, doing deputation after that.
That's awesome. So I have several questions for you because I love this.
Sure.
I love this idea that there's generational ministry where parents give their life to the Lord, especially in a field like foreign missions, which already is a subset of Christianity and a subset of ministry, because, there's so many Christians, and then there's so many people who will do ministry leadership. And then within that, there's only so many people who will do vocational ministry leadership. And then within that subset, there's those who will actually move to a foreign field. And then within that, even there's some who then their kids will take up that mantle. And so people have called them MKs before, missionary kids, like PKs, pastor kids.
Oh yeah.
But if you could, I have so many questions about that MK way of life and how you were raised. But I guess the easiest way to start is, what was it like growing up on the field? So you were 10, right, when you moved to Mexico?
Right.
So you were old enough to know this ain't America. It's not like you were 2 or 3 years old. You were like, oh, this is new. This is different language.
Yeah, looking back, I was probably right at that optimal age to understand what was happening, but not be too adversely affected by it.
Still pretty flexible.
Yeah, very malleable at that point. That was, who didn't do this? I'm just going with my parents.
Just life. Yeah, this is what we do. Yeah.
Right. And one thing that was kind of weird to me, I guess, at that age, is growing up after the first few years on the field, you come back and visit, and you just kind of expect that everybody back home kind of understands your life. Yeah. And then you start to realize that nobody really gets you anymore,
Mm-hmm.
gets what you're doing.
Sure.
So that was kind of weird, but yeah, it was, I obviously knew, I was old enough to understand what we were doing, what was going on. I old enough to be frustrated, and I don't remember this as well as my parents remember it, but I was learning the new language and everything was very frustrating. I remember I have good memories of that time in my life. My parents remember me coming home, crying from school and that kind of thing, trying to learn the language.
Sure.
I look back and say, oh yeah, I remember I had good friends and stuff. But
the parents remember the part that cut them the most. I can already, only 5 months on the field, can attest to some of that with the little ones. But you're it wasn't that bad.
You roll with the punches. I say like with our kids, one thing you learn as a parent is kids made out of rubber. They just bounce. So you drop one, they'll bounce back up.
Physically and
when
emotionally.
You get to be an adult, you're a lot less flexible. Exactly. Yeah. But I think it was good, because those first years, being at that age too, really allowed me to pick up on the language very quickly. I was able to, when you're 10, you don't have much of a comfort zone, and getting out of your comfort zone is not that big of a deal. I was able to really interact with people and make friends and learn the culture and the language. So, I think it was a good age. Really, the Lord obviously, had our lives planned out and knew where we'd be at what time in our life. But looking back on it, I don't think there could have been a better process for immersing me in what the Lord called me to do.
Mm-hmm. I'm in Central Europe, and so just as a white guy, you can kind of blend in if you want to, but I imagine as a kid you didn't blend in, man. Did that ever create rough times for you, where just emotionally?
We kind of got to a point where we just accepted that we didn't fit in anywhere. And I think one thing
what do you mean by that? That's interesting.
Well, we kind of consider ourselves, and I've heard some people use the phrase, and I don't remember exactly if I'm saying it right, but I think they use the phrase like third culture, where
I think
you don't really fit in. You never really fit in your host country, as far as, like as a Mexican, I feel like I fit in better now, but you don't ever feel like, hey, I belong here. I belong in this culture. I belong in this country. This is my home. Mexico is home to us now, but you always kind of feel a little bit like an outsider. But then when you go back to the States, to me, I feel even more like an outsider. In relationships are relationships. You have relationships with people, but as far as the culture goes, there are a lot of things that make me feel very weird in the States, even nervous, going back there's some things, when you get to Mexico, you're kind of nervous because you hear of drug cartel and the dangers that are around, and you're not familiar with where you're at and stuff. And so you get here and you're a little nervous and uneasy, and, don't put the kids too far out of reach and that kind of thing. Then, you kind of get used to living where you're living. And I go back to the States now, and like going to Walmart's kind of a scary experience sometimes, to be honest. I mean, just things that you're not used to seeing, and so you really, you don't fit in, you don't belong necessarily where you're at. And you go back home and you don't really feel like you fit there either. And the place that you feel like you really fit is with other people that do what you do. And I think that really fostered a unity as far as with our family. It drew us closer as brothers, with our parents. We had a very, very close-knit, tight family, very supportive of one another. And I think, you kind of create that bond because none of you belong, And also one thing that, I kind of mentioned before, it's you really learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable. You learn to be comfortable not fitting in. You learn to be comfortable, and I know a lot of missionary kids struggle. You go to different churches, raising support, and then going back on furlough, and you're visiting church after church after church, and you don't really know anybody at any of them. And that can be a little uncomfortable, but you just kind of get to a point where it's like, I'm comfortable being uncomfortable.
That
That's
becomes
just
the normal,
my lifestyle,
as abnormal as it is. Yeah, sure.
Exactly. And I think that's a benefit. Now, of course, once you get settled in, you start to be more comfortable and familiar with the things that are around you. And I would say now, Merida feels like home more than anywhere else. And we've even talked about, if we were to move back to the States, like, where would we move back to that would feel like home to us,
Yeah.
Because most of the places we lived before, that were home in the past, it's like, well, if I moved back there, that wouldn't really feel like home.
Yeah, sure.
So,
and at this point, it would be moving to a foreign country if you were back in the States.
Yeah, it really would be.
Because you've acclimated to Mexico. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, just the simple things like, I know how to get plumbing done. I know how to get cement work done. I know how to get things fixed around the house here. Like moving back to the States, I'd have to relearn how to fix things around the house, because everything's done so differently.
But you're clearly a Southerner because you said cement. So, maybe if you have to go back, I would check the Southern states.
South.
We spent a lot of time in deputation in the South, man. So we had to learn a foreign language before we went to the field.
True. Yeah, breaking the ground there.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean, though, man. I've heard, even my pastor, Jeff Bartell, he was a missionary in Albania for 15 years. And then when the Lord called them back to the States, he said that was actually more difficult because he went to the field alone. But he said it was more difficult as a family to come to the States and emotionally than it was going to the field for just him. And so I can understand how it just becomes your home.
Yeah, it really does. And, I think probably like most houses in the States had that little cross stitch saying somewhere on their wall, it says home is where the heart is, And, to me, home is wherever the Lord has you, wherever you're serving, home is your place in the kingdom. It's wherever the Lord's using you, that's where you want to be. And the whole world belongs to him. So, the world's not really home anyway. You're just kind of stationed somewhere while you're waiting to go home. So,
it's probably that perspective too that gives you.
You can learn to be comfortable anywhere.
Yeah, and that's what gives you the comfort in being uncomfortable. Really, if you weren't a Christian, I don't think that's as possible. Because, I don't know, just from my short experience here on the field, even when things are hard and it's emotional, you're just trusting that, like, we did what God asked us to do. And maybe you can attest to that from a much longer experience perspective, but having that hope and confirmation, maybe we could say, actually confirms in you. It's like, this is okay because this is where God wants us to be.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and there's nowhere else you'd rather be. I remember one of our pastors, I think it was in Jacksonville when we were at school there, he would say, there's no safer place than the center of God's will.
Yeah.
and there's, I mean, sin's universal. No matter where you go, you're going to be living in the middle of, a place full of sinners. And, you can't get too comfortable in the world anyway. So really, I mean, talking about being comfortable, being uncomfortable, that's really what we're called to do. We're called to be in the world, but not of the world. And, you get too comfortable in the world and you turn out like Lot, So
right. You
got to stay,
soul vexed.
you got to stay out of that comfort zone regardless. Exactly. Yeah.
Can you speak on so being raised on the field as a missionary kid and MK as it were, can you speak to this idea of cultural adaptation from that perspective? And so, in missiology classes and missionary prep classes in Bible college or something, you're always talking about cultural adaptation from a biblical side with what Paul speaks about, but also just from a practical side and what that requires, and there's a lot of focus placed on that because it is important. Maybe a couple of decades ago, American missionaries did have the problem where they were exporting their American, I don't want to say American Christianity, but that was certainly part of it, but just their American lifestyle to the field. And maybe that's not as much of a problem nowadays, but can you just speak to that idea of social or cultural adaptation from the perspective of a missionary kid who had to adapt at an early age?
Yeah. That's one thing that we kind of, how would I put that? It's something that we really thought through a lot is how much do you want to influence one culture and how much do you want to import another culture? And I think personally, my perspective on that after going through a lot of thinking about it is, we really don't want to promote any national culture in general. I mean, diversity is, it's great to have different ways to do different things and have, different foods and different ways to dress. And, there are things that we miss, of course, about the States. Typically some of your restaurants and some of the food and that kind of thing, and then they have different things here that we'd miss if we went back there. Cultural diversity is a great thing. But when it comes to the culture, what we really want to promote is not an American culture, not a Mexican culture, but a godly culture, no matter where we are. And that is international. So if I were in the States, I wouldn't try to promote an American culture and say, well, we're an American church, we're going to have an American culture. Well, no, we're going to have a godly culture if we're in the States. And in Mexico, it's not about Mexican culture, American culture. It's, hey, we want to promote and foster a godly culture here. And so, the things that the Bible says, there are ways that we're supposed to do things and ways we're not supposed to do things. And we want to create a godly, a Christian culture, no matter what country we're in. And then when it comes to preferential things or things like how do you cook a chicken? What sauces do you use on your food and that kind of thing? Be as diverse as you want to and enjoy that and appreciate that God's given us all different ways to contribute to make the world a more colorful place. But yeah, you want to have, and that's one thing too, that I think you mentioned, American missionaries tended to kind of export American culture. And then there's kind of a pendulum swing the other way, kind of a knee-jerk reaction to say, oh, we don't want to do that. And so then it got to be like, well, we don't want to influence their culture at all. I think you got to have a balance to where, we don't have to make everybody dress the same way that we do, like here. It's usually in the 90s and 100s here.
God bless
to come down here. And yeah, if we're going to force people to wear a tie and a suit jacket, we're going to smother them all and kill them. They don't have to dress like an American dresses. And they have different ways of dressing up and things. And that's great. But on the other hand, we can't just come down and say, hey, you know what? These people are liars. Lying is just part of their culture. We're not going to try to change that.
Yeah.
Well, of course, there are things you can't just accept here, dishonesty, manipulation, in commerce,
right.
Stealing, cheating. Those are very common things here. infidelity in marriage. Now, of course, that's becoming more and more a part of American culture as well as American culture gets away from the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, those are things that we confront and say, listen, this is. Yeah, it's part of your culture, but it's not right.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter what country you're in, it's not right. You got to adapt to a biblical culture. And then the superficial things, be as diverse as you want. I think God made us all diverse, and he made us all diverse on purpose. I mean, if he didn't make any of us with the same, fingerprint, it tells you that his purpose was for us to be different.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to walk that line of saying, hey, I'm going to accept the culture as long as it aligns with the Bible, but anything that contradicts the Bible, I'm going to confront that.
Yeah, no, that's a good way. I'm glad you said that, because I guess you could say that culture is amoral, except when it isn't. Right?
Right. Yeah.
So it's like, listen, if the culture is sinful, well, then it's sinful and it's wrong. But not all, there's so many things that make up what culture is. I mean, language is a key to the culture. And so, the things that aren't sinful are fine. You don't need to change that. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's really good, because I think one of the biggest problems that we have in ministry, regardless of foreign or international missions or domestic, is that we just, because we're humans, we tend to get out of balance, whether it's to the left or to the right, it doesn't matter. It's just, we should always be seeking the balance on any issue. I think that's a good point. God makes that point in the Proverbs all the time. A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. And so that's really key. Would you say, as growing up as a kid, because I'm going to transition in a little bit to then how those perspectives helped you as an adult going to the mission field, but growing up as a kid, do you remember anything, it's still kind of in this vein of cultural adaptation, was there anything just practically, not spiritually, not in a church medium, anything practically that helped you feel like you were less on the outside looking in, and maybe even affected your influence spiritually? I don't know.
Trying to frame the question in my mind. So anything that made me kind of feel more accepted.
Well, yeah, so
culture,
because with the idea of cultural adaptation, it's like I'm just trying to acclimate to their culture more so that they don't view me as a stranger. You know what I mean? Like, they accept me at least on some level. Do you remember anything like that? I know 10 is pretty young.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, when we moved to Mexico, we obviously, mom and dad were trying to put us in a position to be able to learn the language and learn the culture and interact.
Go to school.
So, yeah, we went to school. We went to church. We had friends. I actually got to sign up for a football team, just a little peewee league, and which is side story, which is not part of what we're talking about here. But I signed up for a little peewee league, and the guys told us, we said, well, we're at church on Sundays, so are the games going to be on Sundays, or are they going to be on Fridays, Saturdays? They said, no, all the games are always on Saturdays. We never play any games on Sundays, always Saturdays. So I was like, cool. So I went and I practiced like every week. I was there for practice all week, and then like first game was on Sunday. They said, well, it doesn't normally happen. It's just a kind of a fluke thing. And then next game was on Sunday, and every single game was on Sunday. So I went to all the practices, and I never played a school.
Oh man.
But yeah. But yeah, I mean, but having those experiences though, just I really was able to make friends. And so, like I mentioned, had a lot of good friends at school. And I look back and think, as a 10-year-old, I look back and still cherish some of those friendships that I made there. Had friends at church, good friends at church, had young men that discipled me when we got there, just kind of one-on-one, and took some time and invested in me. Still remember those guys and look back fondly on those times and those memories. But I think one way that I kind of dealt with it, which was the wrong way to deal with it, was I really bonded with those friends that were my age that I made. I learned Spanish and learned how to hang out and play and have fun like anyone does. But I really kind of had resentment towards authority figures. So I really kind of acted out in class, like towards the teachers at school, at church, just misbehaving in class, that kind of thing. Just kind of stick it to you. kind of a thing. And so I guess I forgot kind of
No,
where I
it's
was going with
okay.
the answer to
So
the question,
it
but
sounds like
anyway,
though
that's
that being a kid aids in that cultural adaptation, because it's like kids are innocent in many ways. So you're just trying to be accepted. You're just trying to make friends. And so it sounds like it aids in that to some level. Dude, maybe this is actually a good transition here, because I'm curious, as a new missionary who is now raising a son who's going to be an MK, a missionary kid.
right.
Did having that perspective, did that affect how you parent your children, to help them flourish in being missionary kids, or maybe
Yeah,
third
a
culture kids?
hundred, 100%. And that's one thing that I think really shaped the course of my life, was the way my parents parented me
Mm-hmm.
growing up on the mission field. And that's any advice that I can give to missionaries who have kids on the field is, follow my parents' example. And what they did was, mom and dad never had their ministry. It was our ministry.
Mm.
And they made sure that we were involved in everything that was going on. Mom and dad weren't planning a church. We were planning a church.
Mm.
Mom and dad weren't going out, knocking on doors. We were going out knocking on doors as a family. And they always made sure that we realized that, hey, this is not God's calling on their life. This is God's calling on our life as a family. When we grow up, God may call us to a different place. He may call us to the States. He may call us to another country. But as long as we're here as a family, God's called us as a family. And so I really grew up with a vision for the ministry here. I grew up seeing the need, knowing why we were here, what we were doing, what the purpose was, knowing, hey, this is not just a career move. This is we're here serving the Lord, and there's a reason for it. And so instilling that philosophy in us growing up and involving us in everything, really, when I grew up, was just very natural for me to be like, well, what else am I going to do but continue to serve the Lord? That's, they really taught us a lifestyle. Mm. And so, I've known other missionary kids that they've grown up and it's kind of like, well, mom and dad are missionaries, and I'm just here until I turn 18, then I'm going to go do my own thing. And they weren't really involved in the ministry. It was like, whenever there's a church activity, and I felt like too, with some of my friends and stuff, other missionary kids, it's almost like there's constant competition between ministry and family. And, it was, well, mom and dad can either be doing ministry or doing family time. And with us, it was ministry is family time. Mm-hmm. We're, hey, we're all getting dressed and we're going to this church event, because we're all working together to win people to Christ and disciple people. And so I feel like the bond, that we had as a family was centered around a common purpose, a common mission, and common service to the Lord. And I don't think there's a stronger tie for a family than to be serving the Lord together. And, as we grew up, that really influenced who we became as adults. We weren't just looking to just get out, and leave and get away from the mission field. It was, we understand that this is part of the purpose of our lives. So
do you think
I feel like
helped you? Because unfortunately, I think there are missionary kids, and I mean, I didn't, do a poll or anything, but just from what you hear, that a lot of missionary kids do grow up kind of resenting the mission field and kind of just wishing that they had maybe a quote unquote normal life back in America. Do you think that, your parents just making sure they bring you along, like you hear the phrase, bring your kids with you as far as ministry leadership. Do you think that kind of helped, you not resent the mission field?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Because it was our project, together. And, going back and looking at friends that I would have grown up with if we had not gone to the mission field, if we had stayed home, the people that I would have been with and influenced by, I look back and say, man, thank God that I did not grow up a normal life, because I would be in a quote unquote normal situation. I'd probably be, doing the normal thing today. and looking at where a lot of people are now, it's like, man, that would have been me. And I'm thankful that God spared me from that and really taught me and opened my eyes to much more.
So now that you're a missionary and you've been on the field for a while now, I mean, it's not like you're new to the field. You're definitely a veteran at this point, haven't been on the field since 2014. How does your experiences growing up as a missionary kid, how do you then find the balance between ministry and family? Because you pastor a church plant there, you're discipling, you're training guys. So, I mean, you're doing the whole thing, but also raising 5 kids. So how do your experiences then translate to what you practically may try to do to balance your family time and your ministry?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's one thing that I've kind of, I've put a lot of thought into, because you're influenced by your experiences and what you know and what you've gone through in your life. And, every person is unique and every situation is unique and every life is unique. And so you can't just take a cookie cutter and say, okay, I'm going to give my kids the exact experience that I had. Mm-hmm. You kind of learn from those experiences, and there are a lot of things that you appreciate from your childhood that you want to replicate in your kids' lives. And one thing that I've kind of realized is, I'm not going to give them the exact same experiences that I had. They're not me, They're going to have their own life experiences, and so I try to look at, I want to take the positive from my childhood and try to make sure that I replicate that to an extent, but then take their life and say, okay, where are they at? What is the best I can do for them? What is the going to give them the best opportunity to grow into a mature relationship with the Lord, and a life of service. Now, of course, obviously, the most important thing that I think we can do for our kids is just pray for them. Just beg the Lord on a daily basis that He will mold their lives and do what we can't do as parents. Obviously, as much as I would like to, make my kids what I want them to be. I can't do more than influence them, and they're going to make their own choices and decisions, and the Lord's going to lead them in their life. And so I, pray for them. I think that's probably the biggest thing a parent can do. And then, try to teach them and, like the Bible says, just raise them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Mm-hmm. For me, the Lord has blessed me with a wonderful wife that, the Bible talks about the wife is a meet help for a husband. And I look at it as, it's my responsibility as the head of my household to raise my children in accordance with God's will and plan for their life, in accordance with His word. And she, as my helper, takes a lot of that responsibility that I have and helps me to make sure that I meet that responsibility. And so she is homeschooling the kids, and she pours a lot into their lives as far as teaching the Word of God, praying with them, and of course in their education. So I'm really blessed to have a wife that that is that perfect of a help for me to make sure that gets done. That frees me to be able to have a good balance between, fulfilling my ministry responsibilities as well as my responsibilities towards my kids. One thing that we teach the people here too is, you have many relationships. God created us as relational people. He created us to exist within society, not to be isolated from others. Within that, what that means is you have relationships, and with every relationship comes benefits and comes responsibilities. And the closer and the more intimate the relationship, the more responsibilities come along with it, and the more benefits come along with it as well. So obviously the most intimate and most important relationship in my life is my relationship with God. outside of that, I have a relationship with my spouse. And then outside of that, I have a relationship with my children. Then I also have a relationship with my brothers and sisters in Christ and our church family. Then outside of that, I have a relationship with a lost world. And every relationship comes with responsibility. And when you start, if you were to sit down and make a list of all of the responsibilities that you have in every one of those relationships, I mean, it would seem impossible to meet all of those responsibilities, And so you have to obviously balance that. But what you want to do is try to meet all of those responsibilities to the best of your ability, only, of course, with the Lord's help. And then when you have a wife who supports and helps you to get that done, you can get so much more. You can meet so much more of your responsibility having that help. And so she's really my right hand. Of course, it's a little cliche to say, but really that is you want the secret to really being able to raise your kids right. Make sure that you and your spouse are working together on board and have the same vision and goals to help them reach maturity as followers of Christ. And so that's one thing. Another thing too is one thing that I learned from a teacher that I had in school and in high school is, take every advantage of every opportunity. When you're sitting down in class is not the only time you're learning. You're learning every moment that you're awake, So use those opportunities as educational opportunities, and don't just. You need to teach your kids intentionally, but you also need to teach them opportunistically. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so we make an effort to do that. So of course we have they have great grandparents as well that are very supportive in that, and so we just try to give our children every possible opportunity to grow and have their own life and their own experiences but following God and fulfilling His purpose and plan for their individual lives.
Mm-hmm. That's really good, man. I think that it's great advice because I think it's sometimes surprises people that the best biblical advice on anything in life really is usually a pretty simple answer. It's like, well, if you just parent your kids intentionally and you and your wife are on the same page, things will go okay. And they're like, okay, yeah, but what's the secret? It's like, well,
right.
Intentionally raise your kids in the fear and admonition of the Lord, and be on the same page as your wife. But it takes even more maybe intentionality if you're going to do something like then live on the mission field, because there's so many other distractions and whatnot. But man, yeah, that is great advice. All right, what I'd like to do now is kind of turn. I would have you tell more of your story at the beginning, but I really did want to kind of focus more on the missionary kid aspect of it. Before we get into, I'd like to ask you one simple question, but feel free to tell this story however you want. How did God call you to the mission field and even into the ministry as a missionary kid? And how do you think that maybe is different from someone like me who I was not a missionary kid. I wasn't even a pastor's kid. I was just a kid who was raised in America in church. And then, through a bunch of circumstances, God called and confirmed in our hearts to move to the mission field. But for you, I would imagine that there would be some different things and experiences that would happen with that, considering you spent your childhood on the mission field and then you went back, to join your parents and serve with them and even, I don't know if you still serve underneath them per se, but could you tell some of that story about how God called you while growing up on the field?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And people, I think a lot of times like you said, they want to know that secret. Well, what's the secret? And people, well, how does God call you? And how do you know if you're called? And
that is the $1 million question, right?
Right.
How do you know you're called, right?
Well, and I hope I don't misquote here, but Jesus said, if I'm quoting him correctly here, my sheep, I know my sheep and they hear my voice. If I said that right,
they know me.
Something to that effect. They know me and they know my voice. The thing about God is He knows. Yeah. It's God knows how to communicate. He's pretty good at it. He kind of created language and kind of revealed Himself to us throughout history. And he's used, different means to do so. You look back at the Old Testament, obviously you have the prophets, and he spoke in visions and dreams, and he spoke in person to some, and then, he used biblical authors to transmit his word. And then, of course, he revealed himself in the person of Jesus Christ. And so he reveals himself to us, and he communicates with us. And of course, he gave us language and gave us the ability to think and to perceive and to communicate. So, I think usually when there's a problem with communication, it's not usually on God's part. It's usually a problem on our part when it comes to hearing what he's trying to communicate to us, one thing Blackaby says in his book, Experiencing God, is that God pursues a relationship with us. And through that relationship, then he can reveal what he's doing and invite us to be a part of it. And I don't think I think some people expect some secret mystical voice, come from the sky or something. And, hey, I'm calling you to do this. I
think Blackaby also talks about experiencing God. That study actually was a huge impact in my life on just how God speaks to New Testament Christians. And I feel like I remember him talking about that God often just calls you to where he's already working. And that is just a big thing. Just as far as like, okay, so what am I supposed to do? It's like, okay, well, how about you just look at what is God already doing, and then just join him there,
Exactly. Well, and one thing my dad says too is, if you're wanting to serve the Lord and you're trying to follow him and you want to do what he's calling you to do, he said, let's say, you think he's calling you to Argentina. So you go to Argentina and you start, preaching the gospel there. And he actually wanted you in Chile, but you missed his voice and went to Argentina. You think the Lord's going to get upset at you for going to Argentina and preaching the gospel, the people.
Sure. So we overthink it a little bit too much. There's sometimes.
Yeah, there's no wrong place to preach the gospel, But, one thing too that I had a professor in college. One thing that I was very concerned about before I got married was making sure that I heard God's calling when it came to marrying the right person. I was very concerned that I would stick my foot in there and mess it up. And a professor, something he gave me a lot of comfort in. He said, listen, he said, are you trying to follow the Lord's plan for your life? Or are you seeking his will? Are you asking him to show you what he wants you to do? Absolutely. I'm scared to death I'm going to miss it. He said, do you think God wants you to do what's best for your life? Well, yeah. And you think that if he wants what's best for you and you want to follow him, that he's going to hide that from you in such a way as that you miss what he wants for you.
Right.
While being sincere, he said, God's not going to do that. It's not, when you miss what God wants for you, it's not because he didn't let you know, it's because you didn't want to do it. And, also I think playing into that, something we've already spoken about, is that every life is different, and God's going to take everyone down their own path. And so I can't say, well, this is the way that God called me, therefore this is the way he's going to call you. I mean, I don't think anybody's ever been called through a burning bush since Moses, God does it in different ways. So in my personal life, what God
I guess let me, I don't mean to interrupt you here. I want to clarify a little bit what I was asking, because you are right, man. It's been a minute since I've been in the deputation world, though, and because guys do want to know the magic sauce of what is the call of God, and I didn't even really mean to hang you up there. So Pastor Jeff, something he always says to me, and I really like, is that God doesn't call you to a place, at least at first. He calls you to a work, and that's based on Acts 13 and the disciples being sent out when the Holy Spirit had a work that he said, separate me, Paul and Barnabas, to, and he told them the place later. And so the work is the important part, but eventually you got to know the place. So, maybe it's not the first thing because a lot of young missionaries or kids who are zealous to be missionaries, the first thing they're trying to fill in is, where should I go? And that's not the most important thing, which even you were alluding to. But when it did come down to God confirming in you, that not only did you want to be in ministry, but that you should do it in Mexico and not in the States. How did God work that in your life? Or maybe how did he burden your heart for Mexico growing up as a missionary kid? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. God deals with each of us individually as well. And he has a unique plan for each of us. And he has a unique way of getting us there. So maybe every calling is not going to look exactly the same. But one thing that he is going to use in calling anyone is he's going to use that relationship. And the thing is, if you're not communicating with God, you're not going to hear anything he tells you.
Amen. Yeah.
And maybe the place that you're going to go serve is a very important part, but also what he's telling you on a daily basis is just as important, So, I mean, I could hear the calling to move to Mexico and then get here and not listen to him,
Sure.
every day of my life. And
Yeah.
I could be a big failure in Mexico, or, I could be in the States and be listening to him on a daily basis and be accomplishing his purpose for me. So he's going to work through that relationship. And if you are reading his word and you're in prayer, then he's going to be able to communicate with you when he needs to. When he has instructions, you're going to be able to receive them because the line's open. Mm-hmm. And in my case, particularly, just my personal story, I think God gave me the unique opportunity, which I'm very thankful for, to have grown up in a place where the Lord obviously wanted me to be here at this point in my life. And in preparation for that, he placed me here alongside my parents and put me in a position where, I think a big part of God calling us is, revealing to us where there's a need and what I can do to meet it. And so in my case, he put me in a position where I had the unique opportunity to see the need in this place and also learn by working alongside my parents how to meet that need. And so really, before I became an adult, I had a vision for a need in a particular place, a particular area, and a game plan for how to meet that need. And so to me, it was just natural, what else would I do when I know that there's a need here and then I can help meet it? And the Lord has already given me a heart. He's given me the ability to speak the language. We already have a ministry here that we worked with my parents to establish as a young boy. So it was just very natural for me to continue along that path. It seems like God.
It
God
made
kind
sense.
of lined that up. It did. It was just and
quite
it
logical.
was precipitated. Yeah, it was. And really, you're talking about methodology because, like you said, the important part is he calls you to a work, and then logistics are just logistics. I could be doing the exact same thing in India. Or I could be doing the exact same thing in Russia or any part of the world. And it was precipitated by me surrendering my life to just do whatever he wanted me to do. Yeah. And I remember very specifically that taking place when I was 12 when we were living in Monterey.
Oh, yeah.
And so at that age, I surrendered to do whatever the Lord wanted me to do. And then from that point forward, it was just like all of the preparation and all of the leading just led here. But if I weren't here, I mean, if I were in Jacksonville, I'd be doing the exact same thing. I'd just be doing it in a different place,
Yeah, amen.
It's just and one thing Dad's always said too. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And one thing that Dad always taught as well that has always made a lot of sense to me practically, especially when someone's looking for what does the Lord want me to do? He says, listen, do the last thing the Lord told you to do until he tells you to do something different.
Amen. That's good. So that's a good word.
If he called you to, yeah, I mean, it's sometimes I liken it to if I were sent as a soldier to Afghanistan, and my commanding officer instructed me to man a post, and he said, all right, you stay here and man this post. I could be there a day, 2 days, 3 days. I could start to say, well, maybe he wanted me to do something different and he forgot to tell me. I could start looking for something else to do. If I were to stray from my post, he would come back and have some words for me, I'd probably wind up in disciplinary action because, if he doesn't tell you to do something different, you just keep doing what you've been told to do. And so that's kind of my philosophy, I guess, is I want to keep doing what he told me to do. And if he calls me tomorrow to go to Russia, I mean, he'll let me know that he wants me to do that, and if he does, then I'll follow that instruction. If he doesn't, I'll keep being faithful here as the best of my ability.
That's really good, man. Because even the way you were talking about, just like Mexico made, so God worked in your heart to want to serve him, in many ways, I'm sure. And, and everybody's testimony is longer than an hour podcast, of course. But I love how you even just said, it just makes sense to go back to, my dad already started something here. I speak Spanish, like I culturally am probably more of a Mexican than an American. So this just makes sense. And that even kind of brings it full circle to what you were saying earlier about sometimes we missed, and I didn't even intend to go here. So, I'm glad you went here. I think we actually talked about this in the last season with some of our guests, that because this is something that kids, I say kids, maybe it's because I'm 30 now and I just feel old, but the younger guys who are getting zealous, I remember being this 18, 19 and zealous to be a missionary, zealous to do the ministry. They get so worried about, how do I know I'm called? I don't want to miss the call of God. And something that Pastor Jeff has always said is somehow us Baptists, when it comes to the call of God, we turn into practical charismatics, and we do. We're looking for signs and wonders and a light beam shining through the window onto this globe that stops on a certain country. And it's like, listen, God is way more logical than that. And if you will just submit and do what he's asked you to do, and then seek his will for your life every day, he will reveal it to you. And the rest can just be logistics and strategy and good planning. So that's really cool to me. That your story is very much like that, man. I really appreciate that.
I love how God, sets us up too. It's like, we were talking before, I don't know if we were recording or we were just chatting before we started recording here, but, with me, it was God put me in a position growing up to where, I really was coming back to what to what he had already prepared me for as a child. Well, then in your case, being in Hungary, where you were mentioning to me that you have a Hungarian lineage in your family. And so the Lord just kind of, and I have a friend that's a missionary in India, and his, great, I don't know how many great grandfathers back, was an Indian Buddhist priest or Hindu priest or something of that nature, and got saved by he got saved under the ministry of a missionary that went to India, and so he got saved and became a pastor, a Christian pastor, and then now this missionary friend of mine is 4 or 5, however many generations down the line, and he's there as a missionary.
Wow.
So, it's neat how the Lord just kind of, he talks about, he knows the plans he has before we're even born. And he knows us, when we're in the womb, and he already has that laid out if we'll just be willing to go.
If we'll just be willing to surrender to his plan for us. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome, well, and you look at Moses, I mean, he put him in Pharaoh's house.
Yeah.
And raised him there. And I mean, he has a way of plotting the path for us if we'll just follow it.
Oh, that's good, man. Well, hey, this has been awesome, and I appreciate you so much. I do have one more question for you that I'm planning. I'm asking every missionary I have on the show. It's a little bit out of left field compared to all the other stuff, but it's really just practical for the time we're living in today. I know that this, for me, myself, the year that we're living in, especially with 2020 and the post-pandemic world that we're coming up on, it's given me, and I think a lot of Christians, more of a sense of urgency. And I feel convicted sometimes that I didn't have more of a sense of urgency before. But I think a lot of Christians who are Bible believers and who believe what the Bible says about the end times and the Lord coming back soon, maybe are starting to have their eyesight adjusted a little bit. Maybe that's the 2020 focus God wanted us to have versus what we were all thinking in 2019. But let me just ask you a practical question, man. Has the world, and listen, I promise you don't have to spend, a ton of time really fleshing it out. Just how does this hit you, off the top of your head? How has the world events of the last year or two, how has that affected your practical ministry and strategy on the field? Has it changed at all? Of course, church meetings and stuff have changed, but just your strategy, your urgency for reaching the lost in your mission field. Because I don't know about you, man, but I'm praying for the gleanings at this point. Like it's kind of changed how I see the mission field now that I'm here because of 2020.
Yeah, it does give you a different perspective. I know the Lord has a purpose for what he does, and he obviously has a purpose for what he has done in 2020. I look at that and I say, I suspect that he's preparing the world for things yet to come. I don't know, how much of his intention is he's shaking up the church. Mm-hmm. How much of the intention is he's shaking up the world? Mm-hmm. I'm sure he's doing both on purpose. And as far as, obviously, the ministry looks different right now. We're trying to get back to what we think is the most effective way. And we feel like maybe ministry's been less effective having to use, kind of backup plans and stuff. So instead of meeting in person, you might have to do something on Zoom or something like that. We don't feel like that's maybe as effective as it could be, but maybe the Lord does, maybe there are people that have come to know him through the situation. And obviously if it wasn't for the best, he wouldn't have done it.
Sure.
But when I look forward, I say, obviously, we're getting closer every day. And I mean, it's not just you see one thing happen, you just see one thing happen, and then before it's over, another thing happens. I mean, look at what's going on in Israel right now. Mm-hmm. We're not even out of the pandemic yet, and now they're being bombarded, and it's just like things are lining up, and we don't know the day or the hour, but it certainly seems like we're getting close. And I just look and say, how much is he preparing the world for this? Now, optimistically, you want to look at that and say, man, there are going to be a lot more people come to Christ through this. And I think we have seen people come to Christ through it. And obviously that's, the Lord is going to work that. But he also, he sent plagues to Egypt. And then after 10 plagues, he wound up wiping most of them out, the armies and stuff. Yeah. Obviously there were people that came to him through that, and you have some Egyptians coming and sending off the Israelites, giving them all their gold and stuff like that, So obviously there were hearts touched through the plagues, and obviously his intention and his purpose, because he says, why he sent the plagues. And he said the plagues are so that they will know that I am the Lord. Yeah. And the Egyptians saw that, but then there probably were some that repented and believed on him, but then there were others that hardened their hearts and chased after the Israelites. And I'd like to say that there's going to be a great worldwide revival because of the pandemic. I certainly hope that's the case. But then at the same time, what we seem to be seeing is we have had people come closer to Christ because of it and through the last year. But it also seems like we're seeing a lot of hardened hearts. You look at Israel, and right now it's like, man, you just go through this worldwide pandemic, and then the first thing that everyone wants to do is jump on Israel. It just seems like a hard heart to me. And then, as we're reaching people, we go out every week with our church people and just go door to door and knock on doors, invite people to come to church, share the gospel with them in person. It seems like we've had a lot less receptivity, if that's a word. People are a lot less open. I don't know if that's a cause and effect relationship there, if they're hardening their hearts because of the pandemic, or so I don't know. I mean, it's hard for me to know what the Lord's plans are. Obviously, he's doing something.
Has it affected you personally? And if it hasn't, it's okay. I mean, if you've been trucking along and you're like, nah, man, we're just gonna keep trucking along and try not to be persuaded, that's a good answer too. But has it like changed your personal evangelism or your prayer time or anything like that?
As far as strategy is concerned, I don't know that we've changed our strategy as much as far as like ministry strategy, like how we're trying to go out reaching people. Obviously as we're evangelizing, the pandemic is a great tool to use to say, hey, listen, if we've learned anything this year, we've learned that life is fleeting.
Life is a vapor. Yeah. James, right.
Yeah.
Right.
This is something we need to be thinking about. And so it obviously gives you a handy illustration there to use to share the gospel.
There's your icebreaker.
Exactly.
Right. Hey, mortality.
But as far as strategy is concerned, I wouldn't say it's changed our strategy, and our strategy is very basic. It's biblical. And, and in fact, honestly, as many things as have changed, and this is one thing that we've shared with our church recently, as many things as have changed this year, the Great Commission hasn't,
Amen.
And so if we're following the Great Commission, you just keep doing it, so our strategy is evangelize the lost, preach the gospel, number one. Number two, and you kind of talked about subsets, we kind of follow that model. It's you share the gospel with everybody you can. Only a handful of those are going to get saved. The ones that get saved, you try to disciple. Not all of them are going to want to be discipled. You disciple the ones that are willing. Out of the ones that you disciple, there's some that are going to be faithful, that are going to want to serve the Lord in leadership capacity and take on more responsibility. So you train, those for leadership that are faithful and willing and want to serve the Lord to a greater degree. And those that you train, the Lord's going to call some of those to be pastors, be missionaries, to be, children's church teachers, to different ministries.
Yeah.
So that's kind of our basic strategy. And so we're continuing to do that.
Just look for the willing
We
people.
obviously try to be
That's
creative. Good. And exactly. And I'll say, one thing, our church doesn't seem to have lost members over the pandemic.
Praise the Lord.
Yeah. And really, we have an evangelism ministry. Then we have a discipleship ministry. Our discipleship ministry is growing.
Amen.
We have just as many people in discipleship and excited about discipleship, so we haven't seen a fall off there. We have a seminary ministry, which is to train leadership. So those that have gone through discipleship and want, more specific leadership training, we have that seminary program available, and we're anticipating our highest enrollment this year that we've had so far in our seminary.
Oh, awesome.
So it seems like, our strategy is kind of keep trucking along, keep doing what the Lord's called us to do, keep being faithful.
It kind of goes back to what you said earlier. We're just doing what God told us to do until he tells us to do something different.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Exactly.
Oh,
and we'll see, what his purpose is in all of this, but
awesome. Well, hey man, I thank you so much for being willing to do this. I appreciate, the fact that you took time out of your day. There's 7 hours between us, so being able to match up, I really appreciate that. You're in Mexico, I'm in Central Europe, so thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your story. Real quick before you go, how can people find out more about you online or however, or contribute to your ministry?
Yeah, well, we have a mission board that we process our support through. It's a real blessing. They handle, any contributions are sent directly to them, and then they every cent that is sent for us goes directly to us. What they do is they're supported as a ministry themselves, and so their paychecks come from their own support, and then everything that gets sent to us comes directly to us. But they help make sure that we're all in line with the IRS and doing everything.
Yeah.
Right, so we're not in trouble.
How do they find you there?
So their website is, I believe it's bbfimissions.org.
Okay.
You can correct me if you look up the website and it's bbfimissions.com. Forgive me.
But BBFI Missions.
If you just BBFI Missions, you can Google Baptist Bible Fellowship International, and we have a page there on their website.
Okay.
And any contributions can be sent through there and that kind of thing. And also our church has a website here. It's aibb.mx. Or if you Google Iglesia Bautista Merida Norte, which is the name of our church, it pulls up a website, and all 4 of the churches that we have here are on that website, and all the information about what we're doing in ministry and that kind of thing is on our church website. Well, it's a Spanish website, but we did put an English page. Some of it may not be accurately translated, but we have an English and a Spanish side of it.
Well, Google Chrome does everything, seems automatically anymore nowadays. So
yeah,
that's awesome. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate you being with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you having me. Enjoyed it.
Well, there you go. I hope you guys enjoyed that episode with Missionary Josh Allred. Make sure you check out his church's website if you want more information or if you'd like to donate to Josh and his family and his ministry and what they're doing there in Mexico. A lot of good things there, a lot of different perspectives from the of the mission field, from the perspective of someone who was raised as a missionary kid and then went back to the field to continue serving, and then he's raising third generation, we might be able to say, missionary kids. And so pray for his family, and man, if you think about it, just pray for missionary kids in general. When you're spending time praying for missionaries and for what God's doing around the world, pray for their kids. Sometimes we forget that, mom and dad have been called to do a work for the Lord, but they didn't get called alone. The whole family got called, and sometimes the kids, they don't fully understand, but they are there because they have to be. And so it can be difficult depending on the circumstances and the country and the culture that those kids are in. But man, I thank the Lord for Josh and for his family and for his parents who were a godly example to him and continue to be faithful servants where they're at in Mexico. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. I hope that you'll join us next week on Missionary Roundtable as we continue to pick the brains of pastors and missionaries on the topic of international missions and the Great Commission. God bless you guys. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. Please rate and subscribe and share us on social media. Also, please make sure to check out our other podcast, Theology Roundtable, at theologyroundtable.com.